Good afternoon, everyone, and a big welcome to Demystifying RPA, what it is, what it isn't, and why it could be a great career for you. This session has been brought to you by Vanquis Bank, and we're delighted to be running this today as part of the Leeds Digital Festival. So a big thank you to all of those joining us today. So in a moment, we're going to hear from some of our speakers, but first, some housekeeping. If you have any questions for any of our speakers, please fire them over via the chat box, and don't forget to specify who the question is for, and they'll answer the question at the end of the session. We are recording and we will be sharing this after by email to all those who've registered. So I think everyone's starting to join, so let's kick off. Over to you.
Perfect, thank you very much. Welcome everyone. And I guess I'll kick off by just saying, thank you to Adele and the rest of the team at Leeds Digital Festival for providing us a platform to celebrate digital culture by talking about all things robotics. As you've already mentioned, Adele, we're here to demystify RPA, or commonly known as Robotic Process Automation. This webinar is going to be aimed at anyone who's just interested in the technology or is actually looking for a career change or a way to flex their experience from other environments. So, getting into it, your three lovely hosts for this evening. My name's James Viktorovich. I'm a senior transformation specialist at Vanquis Bank. I've been at the bank for about 3 years now, dotted about various operational teams, starting in operations strategy, moving through to digital transformation, and then finally in my current role within operations transformation. John, Stella, over to you.
John, I think you're on mute.
The classic.
There's always one. There's always one. I was just saying, I just want to echo James's sentiments about being thankful for you guys turning up. And hi, I'm John. I've been at Vanquis for 5 years now. I currently work as a senior fraud analyst within the fraud department. Again, like James, I've dotted around different roles within the department that have been customer facing or focused on the back office analytics. So I've currently working on focus to improve customer journeys and colleague engagement with our processes. And it's been great to be able to get to grip with all the processes across the department and help us deliver this project.
Great. So I can go next. Thank you so much for joining us as well. My name is Stella Pozoglu. I am an implementation manager from the Go Beyond Sykes team, working together with James and John on the Vanquis RPA team. A little bit of background from me. I joined the RPA space almost 5 years ago now. I joined straight out of university, and I started my career as a Blue Prism developer and gradually grew to the role that I'm performing now as a solution architect within the Vanquis program.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So onto the agenda then. So we're going to cover quite a few topics today, starting with ultimately defining RPA. What exactly is it, and why are we stood metaphorically in front of you today to talk about it? We're going to cover Vanquis's automation journey so far, and we're going to start right at the beginning at that conception level and move all the way to current day. As part of that, we're going to show you the operating model that we designed to help us navigate through this journey. And then also, once we've covered that, we're going to cover those lessons learned. With all journeys, there's mistakes, there's lessons, there's wins. And with all of that, we want to start defining further what RPA means to us and what it means to yourselves as well in your own careers. Now, with the lessons learned, we're then going to show you with our vision, with our intention, and how that's evolved into the roadmap that we're going to present today. And then with that roadmap defined and it's very clear, you see our automation journey so far, we're going to end the session by debunking some of those common myths that may hold you back from pursuing your own vision, and then also show you how to get involved. We have 3 very distinct roles here with your host today. So we're hoping from our shared perspectives, you can understand how you can get involved yourself. And as Adele mentioned, we're going to end with some questions. I encourage you to throw them in as you see fit. As we go through the sessions, you might hear something to answer your question. Not to worry, we can cover it again at the end. But if we don't cover something, please put it in the chat below. And if you have a particular person in mind, as mentioned, just chuck a name next to it and we'll get to it at the end. Lovely. Right. So starting with defining RPA, what it means, and essentially why we're here today. So automation takes away people's jobs. RPA is a short-term solution. We can automate anything. And then finally, robots don't make mistakes. These are just 4 of the phrases or the sayings we hear as part of our roles as robotics ambassadors within Vanquis. Assumptions can be based on bias, they can be based on experience, but also they can be based on a lack of awareness and understanding of such a technology. However, one thing these 4 do have in common is that they can hinder an individual or an organization's approach and ultimate benefit of adopting such a technology. So what exactly is robotics? To challenge these perspectives, we need to understand what it is. And as a definition goes, this is one that Vanquis likes to use internally and externally today. So robotic process automation, also known as RPA, is the application of software to mimic the actions a human would take when interacting with digital systems to ultimately execute and automate a business process. Now, that's a lot of words on there, but in short, what we're saying here is this isn't a physical bot sat somewhere in an office typing away. You know, we haven't got Skynet in the background. What we have is some clever software that is mimicking the keystrokes you or me would make today, a human. So, you know, you have a keyboard and mouse, any click on a mouse, any press on a keyboard, we can track that, we can mimic it. And what that does is it allows us to go after those non-value added processes, those administrative, laborious, pretty much monotonous processes that distract you from, say, your value added work or that extra benefit with a customer. Now, we've discovered the what, but what about the why? Why are we talking about robotic process automation? Well, a report from Gartner in 2020 showed us that robotic process automation software was projected to reach $1.89 billion in 2021. And combined with that, you may have seen from the invite for this session is aspects of 47% of jobs will be automated and 35% of jobs will be fully automated in the next decade. Now, there's a lot of stats there, and none of these are designed to drive fear that your job's going to be taken away by a bot. That's not the case. What we're talking about here is there's a vast opportunity of a growing area of robotics and of automation as a whole. So with the what and the why defined, we thought we'd take you through the Vanquis automation journey so far, and we'll start with that initial approach. Little bit first on Vanquis, just so you can help understand where we're coming from, is Vanquis is a bank that looks to offer credit to subprime lenders to those customers that need a hand getting to a path to a better everyday life. You can see in bold here, we want to put people on a path to a better everyday life. What you may notice is, though, that we use people, not customers here. And that's important in our message, is that all the benefits we see today isn't just for the customer, it's actually for the colleagues helping those customers as well. We want Vanquis to be a fantastic place to work, as well as a fantastic offering to our customers. You can see here as well that we have 1.7 million customers. And what that means is that's a large pot of customers to be serving. And so efficiency, productivity, resilience is at the forefront of our mind. And therefore, we want to give our colleagues the best toolkits possible to provide those outcomes. So with a bit of background on Vanquis, we're now going to move into where we started with automation. If I take you back all the way to March of last year, as with many organizations within the financial market, as well as outside of it, you'll know that COVID-19 drastically changed the way customers demanded and engaged with us. As these demands changed, what we actually found was we saw an unprecedented increase in volumes and complexity of those conversations, which ultimately meant a resourcing problem. We have upskilled colleagues on the front line, highly skilled people willing to engage with our customers. But what we actually found is we couldn't get them in front of customers quick enough. Each process that they were handling with that customer had its own high degree of manual processes in the background, taking them away from those value-added conversations. Therefore, to navigate this, what we wanted to ensure is how do we bring customers and colleagues back together again, and how do we remove some of that background task processing? Now, when we were defining the way forwards, the first place we wanted to look at was identifying your knowledge gaps. Robotics is a very new form of automation for Vanquis. We're not new to automation as such, but in this one in particular, we were. And so the first thing we wanted to do is ensure we knew what we were talking about. And that starts simply with what you've done today as well, which is attend webinars of people who have done it before you. Look into the market, look into your independent researchers, try and get an understanding of what this technology means and the scope of it. Then, to combine with your market awareness, step 2 is build a current state assessment. What we mean by this is look at your business as a whole, look at your processes, understand the limitations of them, the pain points. What are your customers saying? Look to your sources of information, such as performance insight MI, such as customer satisfaction scores, net promoter scores, and then also look at independent research bodies that may have compared your business to another. It's what Vanquis did, and what we found was there is plenty of room to grow. Now, in the interest of speed and delivering that benefit that we were seeking, the third step we took was one I would personally recommend. However, please look at your own organization before making that decision. Is we decided to leverage the expertise of others. We humbly accepted that we weren't experts right at the start of this. We had very limited knowledge of robotics and how to navigate it, and therefore we saw value in partnering with third parties that have done this time and time again, tried and tested. They've gone the miles, they've had the lessons, they've improved if they've gone. And therefore, by leveraging the experts, I'll pass over now to Stella to take you through the operating model.
Great, thank you, James. So looking about RPA implementation projects in general, we do have the following phases. So we do have define, design, configure, test, and deploy for all of the processes that we would consider. So our journey from the development side starts when a process has already been qualified or shortlisted from the business case perspective. And this is where we would start the define stage. We would work with subject matter experts or SMEs to understand what the process looks like at its current state, and of course get a sign off from the teams to ensure that we have scoped the process correctly. Moving on to the design, which personally I think is the most critical part of the journey. It is a stage where we take the existing process and design the to-be solution. We will investigate if we can implement any improvements. Can we do any changes to the process to improve the efficiency? Discuss with process owners, application owners, the IT team, what the art of the possible is. And once we have the design from all the relevant parties, then we can move on to the build. So during the configuration, what we do is basically translate the design that we have created into the build, and that phase varies in length depending on the complexity and the size of the processes too. Going on to testing, our development team first would check if the solution is built to the standards that we have defined in the previous stages, and we would close out any logic or stability bugs. And following that, we would have the user acceptance testing, where our SMEs would provide the acceptance requirements, test data for our robot to process. And once we're all happy with that too, we would gradually decide on a rollout plan and start putting the robot into the production environment. So, and of course, after everything is stable, we would hand over to the support to take over from there. And James can talk us through how that fits to the Vanquis operating model.
Thank you very much. So back to me. So yeah, as you've seen from Stella there, what you've just seen is a plan that's evergreen. It applies to any business. However, Vanquis looked at that model and decided, how does Vanquis create its own operating model with our change functions and our departmental structuring in mind? And what we ultimately came up with was this 6-phase cyclical operating model that you see in front of you here. And I'll briefly take you through what each step means before we deep dive into each one individually. So at 1 here, we have ideology. What this is the discovery of processes. This is understanding the size of the prize. When you're looking at automation, how much do we have on offer? Number 2 takes those processes that have been discovered and takes them through questioning and assessment to understand how ready for automation are they. And we'll get more into the criteria and assessments of that later. However, right here is where we start to begin to understand where the benefit lies. Once we've deemed certain processes suitable, the next step is to take it to the estimate phase. Now, this is one where we'll leverage the expertise. However, you could also have internal developers. But what we mean by this is about quantifying the complexity of a process, the effort taken, the time taken to deliver that benefit, but ultimately as well cost. Once we've estimated all of these, we enter the prioritization phase. And this is a culmination of all of the original three. So ideology, suitability, and estimate. They'll all produce insight. They'll all produce artifacts, documents. And what the job in prioritization is to take all of that information and understand what's the best combination of processes, what's the best consecutive delivery line that we want to set up to ensure that this process delivers as expected. Fifth step is execution. This is where the prioritized processes are put back in the hands of those developers. They've had a go at an estimate, now they're in execution. So what we see here is they move everywhere from the start, which is defining and designing that process, as Stella mentioned already right at the beginning, all the way through to testing before live deployment. And the sixth, but some would not say final process is is delivery and change. What we see here is post-live implementation. That's not the end of the story here. In fact, some would say it's the beginning. Got to fit a cliche in on a webinar somewhere, right? So in delivery and change, what we see here is this is the ongoing monitoring of that process. This is where once it's live, it's not done. There is more to have there. Does the demand change? Does the customer's actions change? What more can we do with it? Hence the cyclical nature. But now what we're going to do is we're going to take you through these steps one by one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with ideology. As you can see here, ideology for Vanquis meant bring into life ideas through continuous improvement and transformation to scale capability. Now, as a senior transformation specialist, my job is to oversee all 6 phases within Vanquis. However, ideology is where my bread and butter is where I spend most of my time. We talked about discovery being important, and we talked about educating stakeholders. That's ultimately why we're here. With ideology, it's not just enough to find a process, it's actually to understand underneath that bonnet of what that process has to offer today and how it aligns with those individuals' long-term goals. Value is a very quick way to understand a tactical alleviation of benefit. However, with ideology, what we try and encourage is, what does it unlock for you? Is it something that relieves benefit right now and gives you benefit immediately today, very short term? Or is it something that's a growth opportunity? Might not be any return today, but 3, 4, 5 years down the line, it offers you the right pathways. And at the end of ideology, once I've finished my assessment through some of the fundamental questions of, is it possible with robotics? It passes into John's hand in the suitability phase, where he'll take you through that now.
Thanks, James. So suitability focused on validating if an idea can then be brought forward in this process. And it was one of the fairly key areas of concern for an RPA project. We wanted to be sure that before we started, the processes being reviewed for automation can be managed by an RPA solution, if it's scalable in the later terms, and if we can manage the output at the end of it to monitor it going forward. And that involves a wide range of different things, to looking if the systems that are going to be utilized by the process have a valid test environment, if they can be stable, and again, if they can themselves be monitored through the back end, so we know that things are running as expected and all of our process owners are happy with what's going on. And that information is really, it's all about working with the teams that own and work those processes. All of the information required for our suitability matrix can be gathered through working closely with the stakeholders, whether that's the team leaders or the agents that are on the front line running those processes, and just really drilling down into the process to understand how it's beneficial if we were to take it through to an RPA project, and what the ask actually is of that process. In addition to that, suitability comes in 2 forms. So it's not necessarily just if the team and the team can manage the automation, but we also need to make sure that our risk and compliance team are also happy with us going forward with that. So that leads us to engage with risk and compliance, complete all the documentation, and really provide those artifacts to evidence that the review has been completed. But ultimately, it does boil down to, can I do this, and is it worth the cost, which is where Stella comes in.
Thanks, John. So coming on to the estimate part of the journey, we would collect all the information that James and John would have gathered on the previous stages of the project to understand. We wouldn't have the keystroke level detail at this stage, but we would need to understand the complexity and the size of the process, how many applications are involved, what types of applications, and then we would compile a rough estimate of, for example, how many screens we would have, how many interactions we would need to build, and all that coming together to form the effort required for the build. Depending on the complexity as well, we would also consider how long we would need for the testing phases, how many scenarios we would need to test, how many test cases, so that we make sure that we are covered around this. And another aspect of that too, as we grow into the RPA journey, reusability as well is another factor that we would consider as part of the estimate. If we have already built, let's say, configuration for 1 or 2 applications and we can reuse that, that can drastically impact the configuration timelines.
Perfect. Right, on to phase 2 of the operating model. So, as mentioned already, those first 3 phases culminate in a wealth of information and a decision's got to be made. So this is where prioritization comes in. Some of you out there may be product owners, some of you may have worked with product owners, but one thing they all have is a backlog of work. This is where all of that information is stored, and then it's up to the team to make an informed decision on what's best to propose to execution next. So here is where we order those validated processes according to their return of investment. And it's important here to note, investment doesn't necessarily just mean financial investment. It means time, it means effort, and it ultimately means, what am I doing instead of something else? What's the best approach? What unlocks the best capability for me? That's why sometimes we question whether is the immediately viable benefit the right approach, or is it something we take a slower approach with and we unlock progressively? And it's all about cadence. It's about how much can I push through at the right pace to deliver, again, the right outcomes for customers and colleagues, which this is all aimed at. So as I've mentioned, once a process has been deemed the top priority, that's when myself or the process owner, such as John, will propose forward through a documented request of work, which ultimately lands in the hands of Stella once again, who can take you through execution.
Thanks, James. So as part of the execution, we would refer back to the diagram that we showed on the previous slide. So we would go through the design, define, design, configure, test, and deployment stages to make sure that we are prepared for what comes next. Again, we would work very closely with the SMEs and the business analysts to ensure that the delivery and all the benefits are tracked, and leading on to John to talk to us about the delivery and the change.
So the delivery and change phases are where things really get interesting. Not only do you need to keep an eye on things, but you need to make sure that the team is ready to take over that change as well and own that process going forward. So transitioning from a testing environment to a live environment isn't always the easiest thing. You expect to have squashed all of the bugs in the test phases, but there's always something lurking in the live environments that you just can't anticipate, which is why you need to keep an eye on different bits and pieces. But working with different stakeholders and keeping the teams engaged, you overcome all of the scenarios that could come at you to make sure that we're still working as expected and the deliverable at the end is exactly as planned. The change focus is more on if the team can support that, so ensuring that the relevant MI and controls are in place to monitor that process going forward. As James mentioned, it's not always just running through this process and then it's done. We're always looking for continuous improvement. So the monitoring phase really needs to be nailed in at this point as well, to not only deliver what we've expected and resolve any issues that crop up, but to continually improve on that process and make it better. And really understanding that the team know what they're getting into, what changes are coming in, what's expected of them. The process could be embedded in a team for multiple years, and now there's a dramatic shake-up, so we need to make sure that everyone's on the same page so that this can be delivered smoothly.
Thank you very much. So those are the 6 steps of our operating model. And as John alludes to, 6 is not the end. 6 goes back to 1 very quickly. And another thing to probably call out is, as he mentions, not everything always goes to plan, which lovingly takes us to the next section, which is lessons learned. This is probably of keen interest to most of you listeners, because whilst you've heard our strives, our struggles, what you actually want to know is, how do I not repeat the same mistakes? So as we've mentioned, the initial approach released a wealth of benefits to customers, to colleagues, to the business. However, this ongoing process of automation is a learning curve. No matter where you start, there's always something new that you haven't foreseen. And therefore, what we've got in front of you here is 4 key lessons that we have personally taken away that we want to share with yourself. The first one is plan for contingency. Now, it might sound obvious, but as John mentions, there is unforeseen circumstances. There are things you don't account for, and therefore these impact your delivery timeframes, but they also change your expectations. They challenge your existing ways of working. So when we say plan for contingency here, what we mean is not for when something goes wrong, but what happens if you discover something that you never thought would be a piece of value? Do you need to change? Do you have that natural ability to pause for a second, look up, redefine, realign your views? The next lesson that we'd like to share is make education a cornerstone. Now, this one might sound, again, a bit of a strapline, but what we mean here is education is so important for the implementation of anything, but more so for robotics, which could be relatively new to most of your environment. What we mean here is combining with planning and contingency. Give yourself time to sit with those process owners to understand their goals, their objectives, their alignments. Because once you understand what they're going after, you can help use RPA as a solution, but also as an opportunity to unlock new capabilities. Talking with stakeholders is also where create urgency, that third lesson, really comes into play as well. We just talked about aligning to their long-term objectives, to their views, to their values. But what we're saying here is, some of you may be familiar with the Eisenhower matrix, but what that is it's a decision-making tool, put simply, that measures urgency and importance on a scale. Robotic process automation is often seen as important. It's often seen as the value add on top of any process you see in your business. However, it's seldom seen as an urgent requirement, as in you need it right now, right here. So what we encourage here is those ambassadors, those champions of robotics. It could be anyone within the team. It could be people who have benefited in the past. Use those champions to drum up urgency, to build excitement, to encourage others to understand robotics isn't just here to immediately provide benefit. It can be here to answer your solutions, to demolish your blockers, to help you reach that goal that otherwise would take 2, 3, 4 more years. It gives you that time back. And then the final lesson is build strong governance. Now, some of you may be rolling your eyes at the idea of I'm saying write lots of paperwork. Paperwork is key. But what I mean here is beyond the paperwork, because whilst that is important, I like to talk about ceremonies, meetings, follow-ons. While 6 phases in an operating model is not numerous by any means, what it is it can get very complicated when you get into the intricate detail. And when you have multiple people in a team, each with their own focuses, things can fall through the cracks. So what I mean here by build strong governance is ensure you're having the right meetings, ensure you have the right checks in place, leverage existing change functions, leverage your risk, your compliance departments, find those experts that aren't just in robotics, but actually are in ultimate implementation and delivery. Who can help you there? And I guess with these 4 key lessons that we want to share today, it helps us answer that very first question we proposed right at the start here, which is RPA, what is it and what isn't it? And so for what it is we've got 3 things in front of you today. The first I'd like to say is transparent. And what I mean by this is robotics is a very objective view of your business as is today. It will tell you how digitally diverse you are and also how far along that journey you are. How automatable are your processes? How controlled are they? Have you considered building for automation in the past, or is that something you need to progress to? Where's your level of digitization? I'm sure if you've attended other webinars, many people have iterated the same message. The next one is adaptable. Robotics is by definition ambiguous. It can do pretty much what a human can do. That could create a headache of where do I start? However, what it does tell you also is there is nowhere you can't go with this technology. Any department can benefit from robotics. Revitalizing, that's the third one it is. And what we mean by revitalizing is it brings new life to old processes. It can be seen as a layer on top of existing process. It can be seen as a key to unlock new processes. But when I say revitalizing, the process of automating something allows you to deep dive into that process, all its steps, all of its pain points, the raw view of it. And what that means is you therefore can also leverage what we call business process automation, which is you can assess the best place to look. And then you consider that robotics actually unlocks new sources of insight, data structuring, platforms for growth. So it revitalizes those old processes. And then lastly, I want to finish on what it isn't. I put here in full caps, the solution. It might seem counterintuitive to where I've just said adaptable means it can be everywhere. But I guess this question here is to say, should it be everywhere? We talked about how the bot is no replacement for true human intellect and judgment. You could argue that you could bolt on all sorts of new technology, AI, all of that sort of stuff to try and mimic as much as you can. But realistically, when a customer phones you, do they want to hear a bot or do they want to hear a person? And it's only up to you. Only your business understands where that needle stops. What percentage of that process do you want automating? The second what it isn't is error-free. Robotics is 100% accurate. It's something I often hear. And whilst that is true, it's a very stubborn bot. It will only ever do what it's told to do. And so by nature, you would assume it is error-free. However, design, define, and Stella, apologies, this is no dig at you at all, but human error can creep in design. Something can be missed, as we've talked about with the planning for contingency. We will not know all the answers up front. The bot will be designed and execute perfectly according to how it was designed. This is why it's so important to have that sixth phase of iterative change. And the final what it isn't is a replacement. I talked about this in the solution, but it's no replacement for true human intellect and those real natural conversations with people. Whilst you may be able to mask a bot behind a non-voice channel, a phone call is something that many of our customers at Vanquis still prefer as a human connection, especially in the times we're facing into. Therefore, what we're proposing here is robotics will not solve your contact solutions, all of them. What it will do is unlock a new powerful channel in which preference takes key. The customer can choose which way they want to go. With all of those lessons learned, some of you may be asking, what's our robotics roadmap look like? We've shown you the past, we've shown you the lessons gathered from that situation, and now I'm going to take you through the present and the future. Right now, as you can see from the two unlock padlocks here, the proof of concept. Vanquis has delivered a few phases now of tactical relief. What we mean by that is immediate benefit, apply robotics on top, and reposition that business to be more resilient and value adding to the customer. Now, the phase we're entering right now is roadshows. We want to transition from a tactical deployment of this robotics and take those successes into a more strategic initiative. With that, we hope to create a more iterative development and longer term view of where robotics sits and how it can shape our roadmaps in the business as a whole. To do this is the next phase, and the most exciting phases for you listeners is the Centre of Excellence. Whilst we've proven the concept and we've started talking about it on our roadshows, we want to create that dedicated team with the specialist skills needed to really realize our vision. Now, the reason I say this is the most exciting point is a Centre of Excellence needs individuals. Vanquis right now has a team for robotics. However, that team can expand, that team will expand, that team will need the new skill sets as they come. And so this is where I encourage you to follow Vanquis, to follow your business, to understand what robotics means to yourselves and look for this Centre of Excellence. The fourth step in our roadmap is education. We've covered this quite a few times already, but what we mean here is the sharing and the adoption of best practice across the business. Right now, we have one team working on this as a transformation initiative. However, long term, we want this to become a cornerstone or a pillar, of Vanquis. We want designing for automation to be at the forefront of everyone's minds when thinking of process change. And then finally, that leads us into the more open, the broader spectrum, which is expansion. Now, this is where we talk about the introduction of new technologies and capabilities. Vanquis has chosen a very specific path for robotics right away, specifically unassisted automation. But however, there's a wealth of new technologies and applications we can consider to help grow our view of this. Things include AI and natural language processing to help the decisioning sections. It can also be optical character recognition to help build the bot's digital literacy. So this is where I sort of encourage everyone to sort of think, where can I help in this? Can I add value to these sections? Do I want to know more? And as you think of that, I will transition lovingly into the debunking common myths, which John will take us through.
So there's a few things that we've heard throughout the project during our inception. So when we were first looking at RPA, and even questions that crop up now when we're going out to new departments to try and highlight what it can do for them. James, if you skip to the first one.
Absolutely.
So the first one and the main one, quite rightly, that comes up is automation takes away people's jobs. I'll admit, I thought that, which is why I jumped on the bandwagon when it came through Vanquis, but working through the project, it's clear that it's not. As James mentioned, the purpose of RPA is to mimic a human's interaction with the digital system, but you're still not going to take away the need for someone to make a decision in the first place. And certainly from Vanquis's perspective, where we're working with people that haven't got the best credit score, that may fall into difficulty, you still need that personal trait there as well to actually have that conversation with them on the phone. So it's certainly not going to be something that comes in and wipes out everyone's jobs and takes it all the way through. You can't get away from the fact that we have made a lot of savings at Vanquis within our processes, but rather than take away someone's job, we repurpose that and refocus that resource. Certainly from the fraud department where the POC started, there's a number of back office processes that were taking collectively hours to resolve someone's claim from a back end perspective. Now that we've run some automation projects, we can actually give our customers more focus through our customer facing agents. They can get back to doing what they enjoy, which is fighting the fraud and helping our customers, rather than be bogged down with hours of back office processes.
And the next one.
Sure, I can take the next one. So another common misconception within the RPA space is that you need to have a technical background, either to be involved with RPA in general, or even to be an RPA developer. So I can speak for myself from my background. I have a degree in physics and aerodynamics. Yes, I did have some super basic coding experience, but that doesn't mean that you need to be to have a computer science degree, programming skills, or coding background in order to join the space. For me and the team, I think it's far more important to have problem solving and analytical skills for these developer roles rather than the super technical expertise. Yes, you'll get there on the job as long as you do have the fundamental requirements, then you can grow into that role. And of course, depending on the complexity of the process that you're working with, maybe some basic SQL knowledge will make your life easier, but that doesn't mean that all the projects would require such skills. And I think John can also comment on that from the technical background perspective.
Yeah, I mean, ironically, 2 out of 3 of us on this call came from a STEM discipline, so we might not be the best sort of figureheads for this, but I came from a background in physical geography where I did my degree. So echoing what Stella said, you don't need to be a computer whiz or have that background. As long as you can think logically about a process, where it's going, think big picture and understand all of the steps that are coming through, you can definitely work in RPA. And personal traits go a long way as well. As James has mentioned, through all of the 6 points that we go through, there's still that stakeholder involvement. You're working with a load of different departments, so the management perspective there also goes a long way. If you have that, you can definitely bring that to a project.
Next myth.
RPA can be used to automate any process. Another one that we do get a lot. So, for example, from my perspective, from the technical side of it, as a rule of thumb, we would say we're looking for processes that are repetitive, have high volume, are rules-based, and they have, of course, digital data along the way. This rules out a lot of the processes. And yes, we know that we cannot automate something that requires human judgment or a human input. Maybe we would have handwritten text, so we would need a different kind of technology. Sometimes the application or the type of application is the barrier that we won't consider automation for a given task. Having said all of these, of course, RPA cannot be the solution to everything, as James said, but we cannot rule out all the possibility that, for example, if the human judgment comes at the start of the process, that doesn't mean that we can not automate maybe 50 or 60 or 70% of the process. That can still deliver benefit back to the business. So maybe some redesign work is required upfront, but definitely we need to keep an eye on deciding on the processes.
And then the final myth I think we have for today.
So RPA is only good for cost reduction. It's just one that's just not true. It's definitely one of the bigger selling points because there's so much effort that you can alleviate through bringing in an RPA solution. But as I mentioned, it's given Vanquis the chance to refocus our workforce on the more value-adding tasks that we can deal with, which is helping our customers and giving back to our customers and help them out. It also gives you the freedom to think in new ways to be able to better utilize our staff. Now that you've taken away the weight of the mountain of work, the SLAs that you need to meet, you can start thinking and looking around the department at what else we can go for, where may be lacking that we can start to shore up with this additional resource that we've given. But you just free everyone up. It's a real morale booster for us as well. The hours that were spent working through back office processes, just looking at the team and how much happier they are to get back to fighting fraud, as I mentioned, and helping our customers in the best way that we can at Vanquis. It's great to see. And the customer improvements as well. We get around to working cases quicker. It can scale rapidly, which is fantastic. James obviously alluded to the COVID, where claims have increased. Workloads across all departments has seen an increase due to COVID. So we can look to tackle that, which may not be hiring more people. And enhanced process monitoring and reporting as well can come off the back of this. Once you've eliminated the majority of the errors, you can really look into a process to understand where things now need to be looked at, where other efficiencies can be made.
Okay, thank you all. So, last section for today is how to get involved. We've taken you through our journey. We've taken you some of the myths we've come across ourselves, but now it's about you. You have 3 people here presenting today, each with their own roots, each with their own perspectives, preferences, skill sets. So we want to just take you through very quickly how you can emulate some of our experiences and how you can even supersede us, hopefully. So starting with John, would you like to take through process operator?
Yeah, so from a process operator point of view, I've been with Vanquis for 5 years and I've worked through multiple departments and teams. So as a process operator, you really need to understand what's being asked of the process and what the team needs. That definition and design processes are really key to starting off any journey with RPA. You need to understand the viewpoints of the agents that are working the process, understand what the team's focused on delivering, and then also understand what is possible. What can RPA actually deliver for us? So one of the skill sets that I've said that is good to hold for a role like this is to understand that big picture. Be logical in the steps, know you'll need to get from A to B, but find the best route there. And that also helps when you're bridging the gap between the operations department and IT. Looking at it from an SME perspective has been probably one of the most enjoyable parts of the process and the project as a whole. Being able to understand not only what I had from my own experience in working the processes that we've automated, but being able to then translate that knowledge into IT and people like Stella to then go out and create the solution has been fantastic. And good requirements gathering at all levels, whether you're dealing with the agents, senior leadership team, or the team leaders themselves, just to really get to grips with what is truly needed through this department. And then we go on to the test and deployment phases as a process operator. So this has been where you sort of need to think outside the box and understand what could possibly go wrong, what we need to test so that we're not caught out later down the line. But we also get into the happy pass as well. So how do I know that the robot's actually worked and done exactly what it needed to do, rather than get bogged down with the what ifs? And defining that backlog to understand what tests need to be succeeded in order to roll through into a deployment phase has also been very enjoyable. It's given a different lens to how projects run for myself. And have we achieved what's been expected of us in the deployment stage? So we've built this shiny new robot, but ultimately, is it going to be delivering what we expected? Is it meeting our cost parameters? And then you move on to things like continuous improvement and monitoring that deployment phase. And that's something that we've really tried to bring out in our process during phase 2, to really highlight the benefits so that we can then go out to other departments and shout about the successes that we've had.
Perfect. Thank you, John. And then Stella for Solution Architect.
Yes, of course. So I can cover on how you can get involved from the developer or the technical side of RPA. So I think first things, it's a great start that you're all joining us today. So if you don't have any background in RPA, I would say there are plenty of resources available online. So I would just look up an introduction to RPA course on LinkedIn or on any of the vendors. There will be plenty that you can get the information that you need. Of course, the RPA vendors have online material and training modules that you can join and follow. So either in Blueprint University or UiPath Academy, all the leading vendors do have their own versions of a learning platform, and they do also offer different learning paths. So if you're not just interested in becoming a developer or a solution architect, or if you're more technical, you could consider an infrastructure engineer role, but they also do have material for business analysts. So I think this is really powerful as well for someone that doesn't necessarily want to follow the technical journey. They can still see how, or see RPA at a high level and how that can translate to their day-to-day job. Another aspect of that, to make things a little bit more concrete, would be to check out case studies from companies that have done this before. I think that really resonates when you actually read about an example and actual processes and the successes around that. And closing with how with skills you would need for such a role. I think we've mentioned that before, but problem solving skills, analytical skills, and strong communication, I think are the top 3 for a technical role around this.
Thanks, Stella. So, transformation specialist. Some might not know what that is. I didn't when I took the job. Skill set requirements are very, very similar to what Stella said. In fact, maybe even exactly the same 3. But yeah, problem solving skills and stakeholder communication, they are fundamentals. You do not need a technical background is hopefully a myth we have fully debunked today. But what we do want to see is logic, is just looking at a process and understanding it, asking enough questions to understand the root cause or the real picture. I put down here data literacy as a 3rd skill set requirement. However, I could even challenge myself to say it's not a requirement. It helps when you're navigating through, when you're talking to different stakeholders. It's always good to be able to communicate between technical developers and process owners who are much more skilled, say, in customers. Whereas transformation specialist may be a bit of a confusing title, what I thought I'd also produce here is the similar roles that you might have within your organization or might know of better, that allows you to emulate the same experience. And then hopefully long term, when the transformation specialist role does come up for yourself, you know what you're going for. So here I put business analysts, project managers, product owners. And as you can see, the first 2 very much fundamentally down in delivery, in understanding how do I document, how do I communicate, how do I understand the process. And project managers are obviously all about staying on time. The time management skills here are key. And then finally, that product owner role. That's there because fundamentally, transformation and robotics in particular has been run as a product. It has a backlog, it has multiple options, and it's down to you to hold the pen and understand, what do we do next? What's best for the business? What's best for the project? And ultimately, like I've always repeated myself with, what's best for that customer? And then finally, again, similar to the other two, is training material. There's 3 key avenues here. If you're ever curious, if you ever want to know more, 3 things I'd encourage is look for online training. There's a plethora out there, free, paywall, whatever you name it, it's there. Next is follow industry leaders. Now, I wouldn't self-profess to be one, so please don't say that. But what I'm saying here is follow those webinars, find those people that are industry leading, find the use cases from companies that have found success with such a technology, learn from them. And then finally is shadow your colleagues, look internally, understand, are those role types in your company? Walk in their shoes for a day, understand how they operate, what they look for, how they think. Because long-term transformation is simply change on a bigger scale. You're looking for those fundamentals. So hopefully that gives you a very quick walkthrough of what my role could encourage. So in close, we're at the end now, finally, some might say. In summary, what we've done is we've defined RPA today. We've tried to demystify it by telling you what it is, what it isn't, by helping show the journey that Vanquis has taken, our lessons learned. And like I've mentioned right at the start, we want it to be a launch pad. We want you to start here. We want you to start with our lessons in mind, no better practice in pursuit of best practice. We have the 4 key lessons here today as well. And just to reiterate them is plan for contingency, make education a cornerstone, create urgency, and build strong governance. You keep those 4 lessons on you at all times, you'll do fine. And then finally, it's to reiterate Stella's great work, which is the 5 steps of any robotic process automation project. Define, design, configure, test, and deploy. If you stick that in any PowerPoint, you won't get lost along the way. So only thing left to say is thanks for everyone, really. Thank you for sitting through this and listening to our stories. On your screen now is our wonderful faces again. Our contact information, specifically our email addresses. Please get in touch if you'd like to have a conversation. I personally like a 9 a.m. with a coffee, so if anyone wants to chat, reach out. And then if you're interested to find out more about Vanquis and the careers that we're promoting right now, please use the link below, copy it down. It's a nice simple one, is vanquiscareers.co.uk, and then follow us on all the social media to stay in touch on what we're doing and where we're going. But as I've mentioned, I'll leave the others to say thank you as well, but a massive thank you from me.
Just to echo James's statements there as well, thanks for listening, everyone. And yeah, definitely do reach out if you have any questions.
Of course, thanks from me as well. Again, reach out to me if you have any questions.
We'll have to have a competition.
Well, James, Stella and Jonathan, thank you so much for sharing your journey. I think we've had a few questions already come through for the part which is now the Q&A. So should we jump straight in?
Absolutely, yeah.
Great.
So first one, what is the best way to upskill in RPA? Oh, depends on the role you're looking for, I'd say. If you're thinking of an organization as a whole, I would say, in reference back to maybe a previous slide, is look for those that have done it before, learn from what they've done, and almost critique what they've done as well. Don't just accept them as always right. Consider whether or not that's a perfect fit for you. And I guess if you're thinking, say, a personal role, hopefully those last few slides really did sort of paint that image of, depending on the role you're pursuing, it's available. All the information is there for you. It's just go and find it. Give yourself that 30 minutes in the busy calendar to just relax and research and understand. And like I said, reach out to those. We offered our contact information. We're more than willing to sort of have a chat and explain what we've done, where we'd go. John and Stella, anything else to add on top of that from a personal perspective?
From the technical side of this, I think, again, referring back to the previous slides, there is plenty of material online for you to train, even if you have basic knowledge within a tool. I've found throughout my last few years within the space that it's very similar. So if you're skilled, for example, in in one of the tools, that means that you can very quickly pick up another one. And then again, I would say if you're trained but you might not have the technical experience, or you haven't been part of an implementation team, then maybe just try something for yourself. Maybe build a robot on something that interests you, just to test it out. I think this is the best part on and learning journey, I guess, for upskilling if you're not as part of an implementation team.
Thank you. John, anything to add?
No, just to really hammer home the point about using those online resources. They're out there, they're free to use, and it is the best and quickest way to definitely start the RPA journey.
Absolutely. And to answer a follow-up question, which hopefully segues perfectly nicely, is how big is this RPA team? Right now, you could argue internally, we're a very small team, say, no bigger than 10. Is there plans to grow? Absolutely. The more successes we have, the more wins we have, the more champions we build, and that wider network piece, we have plans for this to grow. As I've hopefully showed in that roadmap, there's plenty more areas for us to explore, plenty more avenues. So if it's something that interests you, reach out to myself. I'm happy to talk again about the future vision, but also it's reach out to the Vanquis careers page, have a look at what's coming up there. Roles will be posted there, as they become necessary. And I've just noticed as well, scrolling up here, we had a few more questions pointed at certain people. So at the top, Stella. So how do I know if my organization is ready for robotic automation?
Great question. So I would say look at how mature your processes are. If the processes are quite new and there is still a lot of change around them, probably is not the right department or the right area to be looking at RPA. Think about what are the pain points across the business. Do you have high volume repetitive work anywhere across your business? If you do, then chances are RPA can solve some of your problems at least. Error issues or dealing with data issues, if that's another aspect of it, then probably RPA can also help around that. And then I guess it's an educational piece as well, which, to reiterate what John mentioned earlier about, is RPA going to take away my job? Make sure that your organization and your teams know that RPA is not there just to take away their jobs, so that everyone is on the same page and they can invest into this a little bit more.
Perfect. Thank you, Stella. I guess to wrap this up with 2 minutes to go, John, how has the RPA journey at Vanquis been, and what's next?
The journey itself has definitely been eye-opening, coming from a background of not necessarily knowing much about RPA to working with Stella and the other third parties. Just to be able to see how much actually goes into such a large-scale project has been really exciting, and how Vanquis tackles that. There's been challenges along the way, which is true of any organisation, but it's been a real testament to how we work as a team, where we've pulled together to overcome certain issues that we've had, whether it's missing information from certain documents or just dealing with the systems themselves that have probably been there for a few years and not been built with the view of going into RPA. And I guess what's next, now that we've had a couple of successful implementations with our processes, we're moving on to phase 2. So developing that center of excellence and seeing the new process requirements come through from different departments, and seeing how it's growing, not just purely from a fraud perspective, and then reaching out to other departments has been one that's been very interesting. But yeah, we're hoping that backlog just scales, and then we can have loads of robots running around completing all of our processes for us.
That's the plan. Robotic army. Unfortunately, I think that's everything we have time for. Back to you, Adele, I guess.
No, thank you so much. And yes, we are now unfortunately going to have to end the session here. But if you do want to ask any more questions, obviously, please do reach out to our speakers, and we will be sharing the contents. If you do want to watch any certain bits from the session today, this will be emailed across to you very soon. So thank you once again. Big round of applause to our speakers for sharing such a great insights and a really interesting journey. So thank you. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you at an event very soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you
Cheers.
very
Well, thanks
much.
for listening.
Bye.